Recommendations and Conclusion. Chapter 4 and Conclusion from Unsettling Graduate Social Work Education at DePaul University. The following is an excerpt from my master's thesis consisting of the fourth chapter entitled simply Recommendations and the Conclusion. The fourth chapter spanned from pages 69 to 87 and the conclusion from 88 to 90 in the original document. Formatting, most notably the citations, are adjusted slightly to fit the formatting capabilities of this platform. For example, the first footnote herein is marked 1, but marked 109 in the original document. This is because footnotes begin again at 1 with every new post, as opposed to continuing to climb throughout one cohesive document. I also want to point out that some citations reference previously cited sources and in the original document included only the last names of the authors and the page number, not the whole citation. So I've gone back and put entire citations when the source is first cited in this post in order to help readers better identify where I have retrieved that data. I can already tell you that my revisions are imperfect, so I recommend that you return to the original document if you have questions about a source. You can find the thesis in its entirety at depaul.edu/etd as in electronic theses and dissertations /367. And then as usual, I have the recommended citation for the thesis in the text at this point. And it is the recommendation or the citation for the entire thesis, not for this particular chapter. And deviating from the text here for a moment, I do want to let you all know that this is a particularly long post. And so if I start to trip over my words, it's probably just because my voice is tired and my brain is tired. And this is already the third time that I'm starting this recording over, so bear with me as we go through. With that, let's get into the post. Focus group discussions have revealed a number of themes in regards to how the Department of Social Work teaches about settler colonialism, decolonization, and Native peoples. These themes have included a lack of structural competency, wherein students are not taught to treat settler colonialism as a structure which foregrounds social relations in the U.S., neglect of settler colonial history, wherein students are taught minimally about the history of social work as a field, and even lesser still about the ways in which early social workers capitalized on their gendered settler subjectivity by perpetrating family separations and attempted assimilation of Native children, and inconsistent practices of land acknowledgement, which often do not lead to more meaningful learning or action if they lead to anything at all. While these themes are certainly problematic, they are also emblematic of the social work education mainstream. After all, the only thing necessary for a structure to persist is for individuals and groups to do nothing, whether knowingly or unknowingly. This final chapter, therefore, focused on providing suggestions for things to do. The recommendations in this chapter have been identified primarily through the literature review. Specifically, I draw from Arvin Tuggan-Morell's Challenges for Decolonizing Feminism in Women's and Gender Studies. There is no point in recreating the wheel and presenting what are essentially these same recommendations in a different order or with slightly different words. Furthermore, many of the recommendations identified from the literature review follow similar themes and are integrated herein. What follows is a synthesis of the challenges presented in Decolonizing Feminism, Challenging Connections Between Settler Colonialism and Heteropatriarchy, and other literature which I have simply put into context of graduate social work education. As such, they are not necessarily mine, nor are they the students who participated in this study. None of us have sufficient knowledge, experience, or authority to make recommendations. You will, however, read some student thoughts, including my own, where they echo the literature or add specificity to the circumstances at DePaul. As the department reviews the following recommendations, they should be mindful that some can be quickly implemented, but most will likely take significant time and effort to execute effectively. Some are achievable given the resources available to the department currently, while others may be beyond current capacity. So I foreground the following suggestions with a reminder from Graham Wood, with whom faculty should be well acquainted. Quote, real respect occurs only when accompanied by time, work, or something else of value. Problematize settler colonialism and its intersections. The first challenge involves looking at the ways in which proper gender roles are enforced to further limit and manage Native peoples' claims to land and displace Native peoples for resource extraction. For graduate social work education, this primarily involves teaching settler colonialism as a structure which intersects with other structures, such as heteropatriarchy and capitalism. To that end, the department should strongly consider couching their analysis in an intersectional framework. Sincere engagement with intersectionality challenges us to move beyond discussions about individual identity, ownership, and development toward a broader macro analysis. The challenge here is thus threefold: make it structural, make it intersectional, and make it consistent throughout the program. The easiest and perhaps most efficacious way to begin is with teaching the history of social work. As one student suggested, quote, I think it's critical that we reckon with the history of social work and where it came from, and really in our cohorts go through these questions of why do we still go into people's homes? Why do we start doing that? Why do we still do that now? Why are there so many white students in our classes? All of these questions that we haven't, in my experience, really reckoned with as a group. The same student continued to suggest that intentionally and skillfully facilitated discussions may equip students with the critical thinking skills necessary to explore new pathways in social work. Quote, I think maybe more of a facilitated discussion among our cohorts about social work and colonialism. I think that there is likely so much knowledge in our classrooms that's not always tapped into among the students. So, kind of being forced to grapple with that together feels like maybe a way we could come to some type of exploration. Maybe not answers, but something that feels like a little bit more satisfying to be able to be like, I've grappled with this and I figured out the way that maybe I can be a social worker and not do more harm. Another student echoed this suggestion, quote, just like discussing the impact that social work has had on different individuals and the ways that we need to grow and change in history, not history and social work just in general. So they just talk about that and the ways that social work has harmed people and continues to harm people and the ways that it should change in the future. Early social workers participated fully in the settler colonial project through their efforts to assimilate populations into the gendered settler society. Through time, this practice has shifted to include primarily the removal of children from Native families/communities and placing them into foster care. While the practice has shifted yet again, we continue to enforce gendered settler subjectivity. Problematizing settler colonialism and its intersections and situating the history of the field therein may have the explanatory power to demystify our present and illuminate ways forward. As Arvin Tuck and Morel suggest, such an approach could produce liberatory scholarship and activism for Indigenous women, non Indigenous women, and ultimately all peoples. I end this challenge with a quote from yet another student who suggested a reckoning with social work history. This comment is particularly poignant, or is of particular poignance, due to its last question, which, in light of this study, is quite unsettling indeed. They suggest, quote, having conversations about grappling with history. What is it? How does it relate to settler colonialism? How do we move away from that? How do we improve? Our practice is really important because this is what the program is supposed to be doing for us. We're supposed to be preparing to become social workers. So if we don't talk about those things, how prepared are we really? Refuse erasure, but do more than include. The second challenge is a move beyond inclusion by engaging with Native communities and allowing ourselves to be changed in the wake of that engagement. Inclusion efforts, particularly on campuses, have been critiqued many times over. Arvin, Tuck, and Morrill emphasize that they can control and absorb dissent, which stifles our ability to grow and transform. In other words, putting readings about Native peoples in a class or even having Native students or faculty can be used to distract from systemic changes that are often neglected. Entities' inclusion efforts often serve to pacify demands for sincere engagement and structural change. As discussed in the previous chapter, the department has attempted to include Native peoples in curricula through a land acknowledgement on course syllabi. While the acknowledgement states that they, quote, commit to examining our place in colonial structures and creating space in our curriculum and programming to promote the intellectual, creative, and political work of Indigenous people, they have been inconsistent in their engagement with this acknowledgement and have yet to do more than simply acknowledge. Let us return to the quote shared at the end of the previous chapter from Dr. Kim Tallbear, where she emphasizes that land acknowledgments can be a powerful move to refuse the erasure of Native peoples. Though she too suggests that sincere engagement with Native communities is necessary for the practice of land acknowledgement. Quote, it may be better not to do a land acknowledgement than to do it poorly and before one has built the necessary relationships to undertake the task. That said, there is no non embarrassing excuse for the erasure of Indigenous to the Americas history/presence in any event held on these lands. But a land acknowledgement is only one narrow strategy for making Indigenous life visible. Similarly, others scrutinizing the practice of land acknowledgement make powerful suggestions. Wood outlines 3 specific rules to follow and suggests objecting to any attempt to acknowledge that violates them. These rules are, quote, 1. The acknowledgement should reveal a specific relationship between the event and the people who are acknowledged. Boilerplate language is an insult. 2. It should not smell of self congratulation, either by the speaker or the institution. If it makes you look good, you are doing it wrong. And note that one form of self congratulation is pedantic self criticism. And 3, if the acknowledgement calls for restitution, it should specify the reasons for restitution and the means for making it. If you think land should be given back or other payment made, say so. Venture a magnitude of the repayment and explain why. Even the highwayman's receipt lists the jewels and coins taken. With Wood's rules in mind, I suggest the following changes to the practice of land acknowledgement in the department. Firstly, it is worth considering using the using the DePaul University campus-wide acknowledgement rather than the one which has been used to this point. Secondly, add the following from Clark and Yellowbird as they cite Tuck and Yang and Gray Coates Yellowbird and Hetherington, which was quoted in the introduction of this piece. Quote, decolonizing social work starts with the recognition that Indigenous peoples have been the subjects and victims of the colonizing activities of settler structures and processes, and that the goals of settler colonialism have included the elimination, manipulation, control, and replacement of the native. Decolonization concerns the repatriation of Indigenous land and life. It is not a metaphor for other things we want to do to improve our societies and schools. Decolonizing social work, therefore, is not about advancing our employing settler social work approaches. Second, mainstream social work must acknowledge the limitations of Western knowing and imperialist models of practice that have damaged Indigenous peoples and other communities. Finally, it must actively engage with and repair the damage done by the many years of complicity in settler colonial domination. In making these 2 simple adjustments, the department adds further specificity to the situatedness of the university in which it operates and makes clear the connections between settler colonialism and social work. There are also suggestions for efforts moving forward. With regard to Wood's second rule, these adjustments still fall short. While more specific, The use of the same acknowledgement across all classes in the department may still be considered boilerplate. So, it is incumbent on professors to take the next step in facilitating discussion on how what has been read relates to course topics. It is not enough to discuss the relevance to social work broadly. So, discussion should show how settler colonialism impacts human development, research methodology, and social welfare policy, depending on which class you're teaching. Through focus group discussion, students express desires to have further discussion following the land acknowledgement, and they have several suggestions regarding the focus of these discussions. Quote, so I think that there can be an opportunity where students are asked to read it. Like it's not just on the syllabus, it's articles maybe promoting it, different ways saying anyone can do these or should always do them, or making arguments for different sides. Then for students who have it, to have it be a project in class to come into discussion and need to make a decision about what is a better approach to write a land acknowledgement if you think that that's appropriate, or don't write one if you don't think that that's appropriate at all, and kind of have more of an opportunity for critical discussion and the call for students to be able to interact with and push each other as well. Another student affirmed the idea of facilitated class discussions and activities, adding particular emphasis on the purpose and motivation behind such an act. Quote, I don't think everybody understands why acknowledgments were made and the history behind that, right? Especially thinking about new students coming into the department. If it's going to be something that everybody is doing, I was thinking every class that starts the first quarter in the fall is doing this kind of discussion, because that way the entire department is having this kind of conversation. It's not like a teacher here and there kind of thing, it's everybody. It's like a department wide requirement. Yet another student agreed, stating, quote, I did really like the first student's idea of having an opportunity to create more engagement with with each other about this. And I also was thinking in the same way as you, the previous student, that there probably should be more context provided to begin with. Because I think you're right. I don't think everybody or everyone really understands, where they came from or why land acknowledgements have been showing up in syllabi now. Bubar, Kelly, Souza, Lovato Romero, and Bundy Fazioli make a similar suggestion in their piece, Disrupting Settler Colonial Microaggressions Implications for Social Work. And I'm going to pause and deviate from the text one more time here, just to point out that Ro Bubar and Caridad Souza are both former professors of mine, and all of the authors of this particular piece are involved or connected to Colorado State University in some way, where I did my undergraduate studies and women's and gender studies and ethnic studies. And of course, Ro Bubar is on or was on the committee for this thesis. So just so folks understand the connection there, beyond just the citation of this particular piece. Okay, back to the text. So in Disrupting Settler Colonial Microaggressions, Implications for Social Work, they propose students use the Native Land digital website, native-land.ca, to learn about the land they are on and bring awareness to the effects of settler colonialism. And students visit the Native Government Center website, nativegov.org, to learn how to write land acknowledgements. Challenges to the land acknowledgement itself and facilitated discussions and activities are an easy and effective way to continue to refuse erasure, while beginning the process of moving beyond inclusion. The challenge goes even further, however. In discussing the entertainment industry, Jonelle Romero argues that, quote, the industry needs to go beyond land acknowledgement. It needs to seriously start looking at the skilled Indigenous professionals and organizations that have been in the industry for many, many years and start breaking that glass ceiling. I echo this sentiment and challenge the department to begin developing sincere, meaningful, and reciprocal relationships with Native-led organizations and agencies which support tribal sovereignty and the overall wellness of Native peoples in what is currently Chicago. There are numerous organizations in Chicago and Illinois which are focused on policy, housing, culture, and wellness of Native peoples. Some of those organizations were listed in the second chapter, but I list them here again, amongst others, to emphasize the ample opportunities of the department to begin the slow and careful process of relationship building. Organizations include the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative, American Indian Association of Illinois, American Indian Center of Chicago, California Indian Manpower Consortium, Caroline and Ora Smith Foundation, the Chicago Public Schools American Indian Education Program, Diarchy McNichol Center of American Indian and Indigenous Studies at the Newberry Library, the Menominee Community Center of Chicago, Mitchell Museum of the American Indian, Native American Chamber of Commerce of Illinois, Native American Educational Center Services College, Northwestern University's Native American and Indigenous Initiatives, St. Kateri of Chicago, Trickster Cultural Center, Native American Support Program at the University of Illinois, Visionary Ventures, Wolf River Consulting Group, American Indian Health Services of Chicago, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Tanika Biloxi Tribe Chicago Branch Office, Indigenous Peoples Day Coalition of Illinois, Great Lakes Chapter of the Red Nation, and the Chi Nations Youth Council. Relationship building and collaboration may begin with consultations and discussions around current efforts underway in the community. Or, as two students suggested, Native community organizers may be invited as guest speakers in classrooms or seminars. Quote, it could be a guest lecture that is required for all students. Maybe not all. At the same time, it could be offered multiple times, kind of thing, right? So it could be like a guest lecture type of thing. Another student continued, quote, piggybacking off of the previous students' ideas about having guest lectures and things like that, it got me thinking about some of the required seminars for field. That is field placement, the required internship that all social work students have to complete. Because it's a time that everyone can kind of get together and it was offered via Zoom and in person sometimes, but I think that that might be a good opportunity to have some of that additional conversation or specifically having, a required seminar based on social work's relationship with settler colonialism and decolonization. So, beyond inclusion through land acknowledgement, the department has a plethora of opportunities to begin engaging with the community and building students and staff and faculty's capacity to work with Native peoples toward Native peoples' goals. Craft alliances that directly address differences. The third challenge is to scrutinize structures of oppression and our locations therein as issues that are critical to decolonization and political work that must be addressed. Settler colonialism and its intersections foreground social relations, so it is imperative that we understand how we are situated in those structures in relation to others and in order to effectively work together. This practice is often referred to as self-reflexivity. The department should be reflexive insofar as it understands its position within settler colonialism historically and its contemporary social position within the city at large. The university represents a network of power which Native organizations may or may not want to engage with. Thus, in their attempts to build relationships with such organizations, the department should be careful to extend invitations with clearly stated intentions and not demands. It should be prepared to compensate guest speakers proportionate to the services which they are providing by starting with what the guest believes is reasonable and moving to fulfill that expectation. Furthermore, teaching structural competency to graduate students should also involve the exploration of positionality and individual standpoint. Standpoint theory suggests that our social position arms us with a partial perspective, which is always already informed by our experiences of privilege and oppression. Students should be taught the skills necessary to identify the nature and scope of their own standpoint with regard to Native peoples, and to engage directly with that toward more meaningful engagement. To that end, the department may also consider teaching feminist methodologies for working together across differences, such as those by Uma Narayan or Kumkum Bhavnani. Of course, there is also I'm sorry, Linda Smith's seminal book, Decolonizing Methodologies, Research and Indigenous Peoples. In addition, there is a continuously growing body of literature providing guidance for social workers working with natives. Hilary N. Weaver, Michael Yellowbird, and Ro Bubar are all contributors to this literary body and serve as starting points for further exploration. Lastly, and most importantly, Arville, Tuck, and Marill emphasize that our efforts to work together across differences should not erase issues of land or tribal belonging. Instead, our efforts should be grounded in what Tuck and Yang called an ethic of incommensurability. As discussed in the literature review, an ethic of incommensurability recognizes what is distinct about projects of decolonization, and that the distinction is itself the site where the potential for solidarity lies. Decolonization will require radical change to the social and material order of the world because the goal is nothing short of breaking the structure of settler colonialism. This means the return of land, recognition and respect of sovereignty, abolition of slavery in all its contemporary forms, and a dismantling of the imperial metropole that is the United States. It is my contention that social workers fear a decolonized future, in large part because our careers depend upon that current structure. Many of our positions and organizations are made possible through the funding from the settler state. We lean into neoliberalism and settler colonialism and racial capitalism by extension rather than challenge it, because a decolonized future would mean that our careers would be radically transformed or even abolished. Consequently, we must decenter our own interests and be more proactive in learning about settler colonialism and its intersections. We may then put less onus on Native peoples to educate us and be more effective allies in our commitments to structural change. Recognize Indigenous ways of knowing. The fourth challenge is to recognize Indigenous ways of knowing as legitimate and rigorous intellectual contributions to the field of social work and beyond. For Arvin, Tuck, and Marill, this is most notable in regards to land, sovereignty, and futurity. They state that for Native peoples, the land, including the ocean, plants, insects, and more, is itself a source of knowledge from which their peoples have learned since the beginning of time. As a result, ruptures to their relationship with the land are materially and spiritually destructive in ways that non natives often have difficulty understanding. And I'll add here that, of course, it's intellectually destructive as well. In regards to sovereignty, Native feminist theorists challenge recognition sought through the settler state and instead assert that Native nation sovereignty is inherent. Furthermore, they challenge the imposition of settler gender norms, which would limit institutional power to the role of men, and argue that Native understandings of gender and power undermine such oppressive binaries. Lastly, they assert that Native peoples are deeply invested in a future based on terms of their own making. To deny the possibility of such a future, they say, constitutes a rehashing of colonial tropes. For other scholars, such as Patricia Penhilton and Lise M. Lee, the emphasis is on the practice of storytelling. They argue that stories are a large part of the solution to Western, often male/men focused academia, wherein indigenous stories, arts, dances, and languages are systematically devalued. One may also look to Joanne Archibald, Jenny Lee Morgan, and Jason D. Santolo's anthology, Decolonizing Research, Indigenous Story Work as Methodology, for a collection of works related to storytelling as intellectual inquiry. This is also reflected in Clark and Yellowbird's Decolonizing Pathways towards Integrative Healing in Social Work. The introduction includes both authors' story as to how they came to produce that particular work and to make its themes their career's work. They also begin every chapter with a story, which foregrounds the chapter's contents and makes real what might otherwise be ambiguous or purely theoretical. Clark and Yellowbird further assert that the field of social work engages in professional imperialism, wherein they/we attempt to adopt Western methods of helping for communities with fundamentally different ontological and epistemological realities. Thus, they dedicate entire chapters to exploring the role of water, creative expression, movement, quiet, and contemplation, fellow creatures, and Mother Earth in native lifeways. They challenge social workers to shift their value systems towards a centering of native ways of knowing, particularly when working with native communities. Fundamental to their argument, though, is that such a shift would be beneficial to social workers' engagement with all peoples. The department may consider further exploring this text and evaluating how it might be used to change curricula. Across all works addressing the importance of native ways of knowing, authors emphasize the contextual significance. Just as it is essential for social workers to be reflexive in how they/we have come to know that they/we know and do what they/we do, so too must native knowledges be placed in the context of several centuries of colonial violence. Arvin Tuck and Morrill state that native feminist theories make claims not to an authentic past outside of settler colonialism, but to an ongoing project of resistance that continued to contest patriarchy and its power relations. In other words, the ways of knowing to which they refer in this challenge are not those imagined ancient wisdoms which native peoples knew and practiced prior to colonization, but the result of thousands of years of knowledge sharing, which includes resistance to settler colonial suppression. Clark and Yellowbird similarly state, quote, in considering indigenous ontologies and epistemologies, we realize that we cannot return to or recapture a pure state of knowledge before extractive capitalism and settler colonialism. We also recognize that indigenous cultures have always been dynamic, evolving, and adapting to change. The work of recognizing and restoring contemporary indigenous ways of knowing is thus shaped by existential trauma of settler colonialism. In reviewing the literature, the department may feel as though they do not yet have the knowledge or partnerships sufficient to undergo the recognition and integration of native ways of knowing. For this, students in the department have a potential solution. In addition to crafting careful partnerships with Native led organizations and inviting movement organizers to speak with students in the department, students suggest that the department consider cross departmental collaborations, specifically through the approval of elective courses related to settler colonialism and Native peoples. In discussing this possibility, one student argued that the university has several resources and personnel with expertise in different areas, all of which the department has a built in partnership with. They said, quote, it just feels like with social work, they're not really utilizing all the resources that they have by being part of such a big organization, a big institution. So, yeah, just echoing that, we really need to have extended examples or opportunities for different electives and extend our resources a lot. One student uh, pointed out that this relieves pressure faculty may feel about teaching on topics with which they have limited knowledge and or experience. Quote, could we even have a course that's cross-departmental? So if it's something that is offered in a different department, but it's something that we could use to count towards our degree progress, I think that would be really important. It's not like we're asking any of the professors to start from scratch or to teach something that they're maybe not fully equipped to do, right? They can come from a different department and from professors that maybe have more knowledge about this and can teach about it. Faculty may also consider using teaching tools such as literature and videos by Native social workers, other human service providers, and community organizers. This action similarly decenters their own voice on the matter and makes the author or the presenter the focal point of the lesson. Students in the department reported a desire to see more literature by Native social workers throughout the curriculum. When asked to make suggestions to the department, one student said, quote, including more literature from the perspectives of Native peoples in particular. I think it would be helpful for there to be more about what Indigenous social work looks like. That's obviously really relevant to our program, and I feel like we don't. I haven't talked about that in any of my classes, and it's something that I'd be interested in learning a lot more about. Even, supplemental things. I feel like we read a lot of articles in a lot of my classes as supplemental readings with our textbooks, and I think having more Native people's perspectives in that context would be super helpful. Another student followed by simply stating, quote, "I agree, including more literature from perspective of Native peoples or just indigenous authors." In cases such as the use of Sherman Alexie's The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, I commend the department on its creative use of Native literature to provide a thorough yet easily accessible case study. I would suggest a change, however, due to the context in which students at DePaul are practicing. Illinois does not have federally recognized tribes or reservation lands within its state borders yet. So Alexie's novel does not speak to the experience which many natives in the city share. The department should be more intentional about using case studies from the so-called Chicagoland area. Susan Power comes to mind as an author with which to begin seeking such material. Bubar, Kelly, Souza, Lovato Romero, and Bundy Fazioli suggest a lesson utilizing a recorded lecture by a native social worker. Quote, "A more advanced skill includes asking social work students to view Dr. Yellowbird's 2-hour presentation titled Neurodecolonization and the Medicine Wheel, an Indigenous Approach to Healing the Traumas of Colonization, which is available via YouTube. The online or in classroom discussion can then focus on inviting each student to identify 2 important themes from this presentation that they believe are imperative for social work practice regarding settler colonialism's impact on their work and consciousness. The course instructor can promote discussion on critical thought and self-reflexivity specific to their department as a social work practitioner. Question academic participation in Indigenous dispossession. The fifth challenge is appropriately the final challenge, as it is to question the discursive and material practices of social work and the academy writ large may how the discursive and material practices of social work in the academy writ large may participate in the dispossession of Indigenous peoples' land, livelihoods, and futures, and to then divest from these practices. They state that there is not an easy checkbox for the questioning and divestment from practices that dispossess, but they offer that one might start with the assigned curriculum of one's department and individual courses and assessing how relevant Native concepts and epistemologies might be engaged in ongoing research in the field. When the department has engaged meaningfully in the prior challenges, they may feel it is appropriate to offer a class housed in their own department. One student felt strongly about this suggestion, arguing that it may be necessary for social workers preparing to graduate and enter the practice field where they will very well engage with different communities. Quote, "I think having a full class dedicated to these topics is super important just for our own practices, right? Especially if we're going to be culturally competent social workers. Why isn't this something we're talking about? At this point, these topics are really important to us, not being able to practice to the best of our abilities and to include all people. And if we're working towards more equitable services to others like this, these are things that we need to talk about because it's so interwoven into our work, especially given the history of social work and that it doesn't come from a great place, right? To that end, they may consider also reviewing Amy Fisher Williams' dissertation, Tribal Sovereign Status, Conceptualizing its Integration into the Social Work Curriculum, in which she has developed a syllabus for a course she titles Indigenous Communities and Peoples, Effective Social Work Practice. This course is specifically designed to arm social workers with the knowledge of tribal sovereignty and common experiences amongst Native peoples. Units includes lessons on historical trauma, sovereignty, self-governance, cultural identity, and environmental justice. The department may also benefit from looking to other institutional models for Native community engagement and curriculum development. For example, Northwestern University's Center for Native American and Indigenous Research, or University of Illinois Chicago's, or UIC's, Native American Support Program. For the foundations of curriculum development, the department may look to the Chicago Public Schools American Indian Education Program, which makes several teaching tools available for free of charge on their website. For a model more specific to graduate social work education, they may look to the University of Manitoba's Master of Social Work based in Indigenous Knowledges program. It is incumbent upon the department to thoroughly review these resources and models and adjust curricula accordingly. One last suggestion in this regard comes from a student in the department who suggested that DePaul owns a lot of land, which may be surrendered to Native people. The department should be hard pressed to support Native organizing to reclaim such land if or when it occurs. Conclusion. While it is many social workers' endeavor to help others, we are situated in structural and historical relations which privilege us with power over communities. Settler colonialism is one such structure wherein Native peoples are continuously subject to projects aimed at eliminating their existence as peoples in order to allow access to territory for settlers. Settler colonialism and its intersections with other structures such as capitalism, neoliberalism, imperialism, and heteropatriarchy foreground all social relations in the United States and are thus the stage in which policymaking, institutional organizing, interpersonal interaction, and identity development play out. For these reasons, it is imperative that social work education include settler colonialism, movements to address and break it, or decolonization, and the peoples most directly and negatively affected by it, Native peoples. This study has used student focus groups to explore how the Department of Social Work at DePaul University teaches about settler colonialism, decolonization, and Native peoples. Focus group discussions have revealed a number of themes, including a lack of structural competency wherein students are not taught to treat settler colonialism as a structure which foregrounds social relations in the U.S., neglect of settler colonial history wherein students are taught minimally about the history of social work as a field, and even lesser still about the ways in which early social workers capitalized on their gendered settler subjectivity by perpetrating family separations and attempted assimilation of Native children, and inconsistent practices of land acknowledgement, which often do not lead to more meaningful learning or action. While these themes are troubling indeed, they are part and parcel of the social work mainstream, and literature from Native social workers and Native feminist theorists provides pathways forward. Their challenges include problematizing settler colonialism and its intersections by looking at the ways in which proper gender roles are enforced to further displace Native peoples for resource extraction, refusing erasure but doing more than simply including by engaging with Native communities and allowing ourselves to be changed in the wake of that engagement. Crafting alliances that directly address differences by acknowledging structures of oppression and our locations therein as issues that are critical to decolonization and political work that must be addressed. Recognizing Native ways of knowing as legitimate and rigorous intellectual contributions to the field of social work, and questioning academic participation in Native dispossession with the assigned curriculum of one's department and individual courses, and assessing how relevant Native concepts and epistemologies might be engaged in ongoing research in the field. In light of this study, the department should take these challenges to heart and consider them carefully. Some of them can be addressed immediately, while most will require small, slow, and careful work at building honest and reciprocal relations with Native peoples in the area. Most will require vulnerable reflections on each individual student, staff, and faculty's positionality, as well as the department's as a whole. Teaching structural competency and social work history are two excellent ways to begin teaching about settler colonialism, and through that process, begin to strengthen capacity for reflexivity. Perhaps, moving forward, graduate social work education may yet contend with harm caused by the fields historically and contemporarily, and graduate social work students may achieve their goals of helping individuals and community. Perhaps, moving forward, we may yet begin to realize changed relations and a decolonized future.